Good afternoon. Goodness, we're so glad to have all of you with us. Welcome to the library. This is a wonderful opportunity for all of us. We've had some wonderful speakers, but I believe that this afternoon's will top the speakers that we've had in the past because he's such an accomplished individual, and that, you know, a statesman, an educator, a leader, a former governor, and most importantly now, he has a librarian in his family. So I wanted to be sure and bring that out. Certainly we are so pleased to have Governor Winter, and certainly pleased to have Mrs. Winter. And would you please stand and be recognized? Now, I have a little something I wanted to tell you. I think that you saw in the paper where our speaker had a birthday. Well, that's been about a week ago. Now, he's never had a maroon and white birthday. So we want to do that today, and we want to first sing Happy Birthday. So please join me in singing Happy Birthday to Governor Winter. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Winter. Happy birthday to you.
I wish that this audience will be charitable to me today as our next speaker.
Governor, we thought a lot about what would be the most unique and most memorable gift we can give you on this very special occasion. Due to some recent changes, some of these are being retired. Not all of them are any effect. But anyway, take this as a part of our love for you and all the things you have done and will continue to do for ourselves.
Well, again, Governor Winter, happy birthday, and I'm sure that your wish will come true with this audience and any other audience to whom you made a presentation. Each of you have a program, and we will follow that program without interruption. So we will now have the official welcome from Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Francis, and good afternoon, everybody. Our speaker today is certainly a sterling example of what Morris Collins, or Bill Collins as most of us knew him, had in mind when he was here in terms of creating a climate and environment for discussion about the issues of the day. And certainly as we look at the newspaper, anything we do, I was in Washington yesterday, the changes, Rodney, since I first started going to Washington in terms of access and other things, it's like you're going into another country. And it's a sad thing brought about by differences among men. And opportunities like this one provide a chance for each of us to get a little bit better understanding of how others see themselves, how they see us, how we see each other, and how we see the world. It is a special pleasure to me to have Governor Winter here today because I had the pleasure of serving under him, and he and I went around giving talks about planting trees when he was governor, and he was widely known in those days, among other talents, as a forestry governor. And when I first got back to Mississippi, he reminded me that he did all those things I asked him to do about encouraging people to plant trees, and he said, now Shirley, what are we going to do with all these trees? So he certainly has done his part in helping to ensure the sustainability of the forest resource of the state, among so many, many other kinds of things. So it's a great treat to have him here, and he looks the same way he did when I first met him 25 years ago. So again, we thank you all for being here, and we look forward to what Governor Winter has to say.
discovered over the last few days as I prepared these introductory remarks that it's much easier to take a resume with a limited number of accomplishments and expand on it than it is to take a life that's been lived as William Winter has his and reduce it down to a manageable summary. It's a little like saying, tell us about the book War and Peace in 3 sentences or less. It just can't be done. Governor William Winter is an example of all that's good about what Tom Brokaw labeled as the greatest generation. They came from the Depression, they went to war, and they came home and kept on working. William Winter epitomizes that generation who stays with the task until the job's done rather than simply until they've done enough. I was in a planning meeting just the other day. The subject matter pertained to yet another effort to launch some segment of life in Mississippi into a more progressive orbit. The question was asked, how do we go about planning the most effective meeting possible? The answer came back, let's pick several dates and choose the one that William Winter has available to speak. William F. Winter served as governor of the state of Mississippi from 1980 to 1984, but in a sense he never stopped being the Governor Winter that most people call him. Governor Winter could have served his time as governor, accepted elder statesman status for a few years beyond that, retired to his rocking chair, and having done so, would have compiled a career that would have been the envy of anyone who ever offered himself for public service. He would have none of that. In fact, if you look at the dates beside many of his accomplishments after his service in the state legislature, as state treasurer, lieutenant governor, and governor, you will find that many of his most notable achievements have occurred in years since his elected public service career. In your program, you will note his numerous board memberships and chairmanships. I would ask you to also note that a very few of these are simply honorary, but are working memberships where Governor Winter's leadership could be extended to make things better. Add to that his numerous distinguished professorships, fellowships, and honorary degrees, and for good measure throw in time spent as a serious historian and contributing author to several books, and you have not only a life well lived, but a life lived to the brim. The best part about it is that he's still adding to that resume as a newly minted octogenarian and shows no signs of slowing down. Only last week, the Institute for Racial Reconciliation at the University of Mississippi was appropriately renamed the William Winter Institute for Racial Reconciliation. All through these years of work and accomplishments, Governor Winter has had his wife, former First Lady Elise Winter, and his 3 daughters by his side. For years, as I've gone to meetings and conferences in other parts of the country, I can't recall attending one where numerous people didn't ask about their good friend, William Winter. So I say thank you, Governor, for letting us be honored to answer those questions with the pride that we can claim in sharing this great state with you. And thank you for honoring us with your presence today as a lecturer in the Morris W.H. Bill Collins Speaker Series.
Thank you, Marty. Thank you, Marty Wiseman. Let me thank you for those very generous remarks. Let me thank so many of you for turning out here on a rainy afternoon. As I was getting out of my car with my wife Elise a while ago, I said, nobody going to be there today to listen to me make a speech. And here you are. And I couldn't be more pleased to be here on this campus, be in company of these distinguished folks that I'm sitting with, the distinguished President Dr. Charles Lee, Marty McCurk, the President of the Senate Montgomery Association, and of course Francis Coleman. Thank you for asking me. Thank you for coming out and subjecting yourself to what I hope will not be a long-winded speech, even though it may be a boring speech. I see so many of you here that I've known for such a long time that I'm tempted to go around the room and call so many of you by name, and then I would really be in big trouble. I do want to call one name, though. I want to call the name of a fellow I grew up with from Grenada County named Brian Baker. He and I lived 3 miles apart, and we were born 3 days apart. And he and I have been very close friends down through the years, even though he became a bulldog and I became a rebel. But I have my cowbell now, and so I consider myself an honorary bulldog. I received a more hospitable reception here than I received down in Pascagoula a while back. This is a true story. I was coming out of the courthouse down in Pascagoula, and a fellow looked at me and said, "Ain't you William Wemmer?" And I wasn't sure whether that was a friendly question or not, but I assured him I was who he thought I was. Who he thought I was. He said, "I thought you were dead." And I said, "I'm just politically dead." And that seemed to make him feel better. Well, very seriously, I am so honored by this invitation to come here to Mississippi State University and participate in this series honoring my longtime friend, Dr. Bill Collins. And I can think of no better way to begin my remarks this afternoon than to remind us all of who Bill Collins was and the incredible impact which he made on public administration during his distinguished career. I first met him when he came to Mississippi State in 1977, after he had headed the Carl Vinson Institute, as you know, at the University of Georgia. It was not until a few years after that, though, and after I'd been elected governor of Mississippi, that I came really to appreciate the true stature and value of Dr. Collins. I found in him not only a gifted academician and teacher, but an invaluable counselor in practical political decision-making. On more than one occasion, he helped guide me through some very difficult issues with the wise and sure instincts of a man who understood how government was supposed to work and how public policy ought to be formulated and implemented. To put in a little clearer perspective the genius of this uncommon man, let me repeat here today what I said about him on the occasion of his 75th birthday dinner at Mississippi State on August 8, 1992. Many of you were there that evening. I reflected on the contributions which he had made as a teacher. I said this almost 11 years ago. Bill Collins put a stamp on thousands of young Americans at the University of Georgia and now here at Mississippi State, teaching them more than bare facts or abstract political theory, teaching them a dedication to the task of making our political system work as well as it can work, teaching them a love for and a responsibility to serve their country, teaching them that public service is a noble and distinguished calling, teaching them that government is our friend and not our enemy, teaching them that as citizens we are expected to put more into the system than we take out. Well, we can look around our state and our region today and see the marvelous results of his work, not the least of which is this prestigious John C. Stennis Institute of Government, now headed by Dr. Marty Wiseman. His Truman Scholars, whose selection committee he chaired, now hold positions of leadership in so many areas of society. The Taft Seminar for Teachers, which he directed, gave inspiration and encouragement to hundreds of teachers. Wherever people speak of the ideals of public service, the name of Bill Collins is always mentioned. And so today, I'm honored to be a part of this program which recognizes so dedicated and valuable a leader. Now let me turn to a few reflections based on some of my experiences in the arena of elected politics going back over an awful long time, more than 50 years. The first and most emphatic impression which I have is that despite the naysayers and the cynics, we have in Mississippi today an infinitely fairer, more just, more open, and more responsive political system than when I was first elected to the Mississippi legislature 55 years ago. I would remind you that in that year here in Mississippi, throughout the Deep South, no black American could have sat where we are meeting today. They could not have enrolled at this great university, could not have joined us white Americans for lunch or stayed at the local hotel or sat beside us on a train or bus. What is more, the political process excluded all but a mere handful of black people. And no black person would have ever thought of running for public office. In 1948, the first year I was in the legislature, I went down to Alcorn A&M College, now Alcorn State University. And I sat on the porch of the president, the mighty home of the president of that college, a man who held a PhD degree from a major American university. And he told me, without bitterness, but with a great deal of sadness, that he could not really serve and function as well as he wanted to because he was not permitted to register to vote in the county where his college was located. In that earlier time, it was an accepted fact of life that here in the South, the vast majority of students would never finish high school. In Mississippi that year, only 1 in 4 white students was finishing high school, only 1 in 40 black students. What is more distressing is that that was considered sound public policy, since it ensured that we would be able to maintain a large reservoir of low-wage, unskilled workers to work in the fields and factories and sawmills. Across the country, we were almost totally oblivious to our natural environment. We had virtually eliminated the great virgin pine forests of the South, had wasted some of our richest soil, had polluted our streams and lakes, and had decimated our native wildlife. Brown Baker and I grew up swimming in rivers and creeks that reeked of chemical waste and were conduits for raw sewage. He and I never saw a deer or a wild turkey in the woods there where we lived. We never heard anyone even mention the environment. And even though we had just emerged from World War II as the unquestioned leader of the free world, we were a nation racked by fear and suspicion and insecurity. We were afflicted with political leaders who not only trafficked in racial bigotry, but who flaunted the First Amendment guarantees of the Constitution. The red hunters were on the prowl, and Joe McCarthy was soon to come into his own. the accepted way to defeat a political candidate who challenged the status quo, and especially the racial status quo, was to call him a communist sympathizer. And I know a little bit about that. While we look back nostalgically on those years as representing the good old days when things were solid and safe and simple, I can assure you that they were not good times for millions of Americans who had, for reasons of race or class or gender or religion or ideology, been excluded from a seat at the decision-making table. In my city of Jackson, public policy was usually made by a handful of insiders who were male, white, rich, and zealous guardians of the status quo. That system of the good old boys operated in almost every other community. I never knew a meeting of the Board of Supervisors anywhere or a legislative committee that was open to the public. Almost all public business was carried on behind closed doors. But what has happened since? Motivated and inspired by ideas that in so many instances came from the intellectual force of universities like this one where we are today, we produced a generation of more creative and enlightened leaders than we had known before. We marshaled our unprecedented domestic resources to educate more of our people, to create new economic opportunities, and to break down the barriers that had for so long denied fundamental rights to millions of our fellow citizens. We worked at restoring our land and forests, cleaning up our streams, protecting our wildlife. We opened the doors of our courthouses and city halls and legislative committee rooms. It is obvious that we have come a long way. And as I said before, this is manifestly a better state and a better country than the one in which I grew up. But as far as we have come, we still have a long way to go. Now, I hope that the terrible events of September 2001 will help us develop a new perspective on just where we are. As a result of that tragic experience, we saw an immediate surge of patriotic fervor in this country. Flags have been waving all over the place, and that is a heartwarming response. Flags, as I know, can be powerful symbols. But let me remind you that patriotism is a lot more than the display of banners and symbols and the playing of martial music. It is more than feeling good about ourselves and our military response to the awful specter of terror. True and meaningful patriotism must involve doing those things that ensure that our country is going to be a better place for all of us in the future. And that patriotism must include an interest in the kind of educational system we have and our willingness to make the investments to pay for it. It must be denoted by our resolve to preserve and protect the natural bounty of rich land and clean air and clear streams that we originally inherited from an earlier generation. It must be reflected in our commitment to sustaining the kind of communities that people want to live in, where we don't have to exist in fear and ignorance of our neighbors, and where our deeply held hopes and dreams can be fulfilled through hard work, and where everybody is treated with dignity and respect. It must be expressed in our determination not to succumb to a compromise of our individual liberties, or to develop a careless or indifferent or intimidated acquiescence in the further expansion of intrusive searches and seizures. Legitimate national defense is one thing. Unnecessary snooping into the private lives of American citizens is something else. And I'm afraid some of that is going on these days. True patriotism must in essence be based on the understanding that none of us is an island, and that each one of us as citizens must be willing to make sacrifices for the common good and to carry our share of the load. The exclusive pursuit of self-interest is almost a surefire way to ensure that our political and economic system will break down. Too many of us have been encouraged to take advantage of the getting while the getting is good. For some, that has meant taking advantage of the perquisites of public office. For others in the corporate world of Enron and WorldCom, it has meant claiming all the benefits and privileges of our economic system at the expense of innocent employees, stockholders, and consumers. So it's time for all of us, and I'm looking in the mirror when I say this, it's time for all of us, and especially for those of us who have been so greatly favored as to be able to have been involved in public leadership in this state and leadership in this great university, to lead the return to a point of view that puts social justice before private advantage, that puts community building at least on a par with personal empire building, and that understands that our own individual liberty is inextricably linked to our respect and concern for every other individual. But how do we translate these ideals into some sort of meaningful political action? I'm not telling you that it is simple or easy or without sacrifice. There are no silver bullets. Our political system is a reflection of our collective values and priorities. So first of all, there must be a commitment to those priorities, some of which I have spoken about. There must be more of a willingness on the part of all of us to respond to leaders who will challenge us to make sacrifices for the public good. And that just may include recognizing that we may have to pay a little more in taxes to sustain a healthy and secure society. Those of us who have seriously worked at it for any length of time know that making democracy function properly has never been easy. It's when we try to make it too easy that we get into trouble. It is more than slogans and shibboleths and flag waving. Making democracy work better is now what all of us must be about. An obvious part of this process is determining how our formal structure of government can be better organized. And involved in this, Marty has worked at this for a long time, is the removal of those outmoded structural barriers to proper performance. And this can be a very difficult problem. So here we are talking about turf protection. And there is no more determined defender of territory than the embattled guardian of the political status quo. We must move to create more regional approaches that cut across some of the old political barriers. But lest I overemphasize the importance of structure, I would tell you that even a textbook model for the operation of government can still fall far short of achieving the desired result. The only thing that will make a difference in government and in our larger society is the performance of the individual human beings who make up that system. Someone has said that the most important official in our system, the most important office in our system is the office of private citizen. And that's why it is so vital that we maintain the concept that individual public and civic service is a noble and worthy calling. Those of us who have had the good fortune to serve in government know how many genuinely dedicated and committed people work there. Rather than fleeing from it, now is the time when political participation is more important than ever, and attracting the ablest people to the public service is more important than ever. I can tell you that out of my own experience, no greater satisfaction can come to anyone than to be involved in a process that can improve the lives of one's fellow human beings. In politics, that is always possible. In fact, it is only through political activity of some kind that we achieve this kind of result. I still recall with a lot of satisfaction that long ago dormitory conversations that some of us who were first-year law students at Ole Miss had about running for the legislature. One student announced that he was planning to run, and another one hinted that he might run. Before the semester was over, 13 of us who were students at Ole Miss were candidates for the legislature, and 12 of us were elected. 12 of us who were still enrolled in school. One of them was the president of the student body. But in that same legislature, the vice president of the student body, enrolled here at Mississippi State, was a member of the legislature. And the president of the student body at the University of Southern Mississippi was a member of the legislature. It was the youngest legislature in this century, and I think one of the best. I won't tell you that we changed the world, but we did make a difference. We broke up some old status quo politics, and we had the immense satisfaction of creating a more open political system. Measured in terms of the overall picture, our contributions were only a very small blip on a very large screen. But isn't that almost always the case? Most constructive efforts in politics go largely unheralded and unsung. That does not make them less important in achieving an ultimate result. Our system must constantly look at ways to reform itself. We need more boat rockers, men and women who are willing to use their creative skills in devising better ways to do things. And that's why the Stennis Institute of Government and the Stennis Center for Public Service, Brother Rogers, are making such a significant contribution to our nation's political system. Utilizing at this great university the intellectual resources that have been assembled here to give new dimensions to the disciplines of political science and public administration, and to be an effective agent of change in the enhancement of government performance. The Institute and the Center are able to say with considerable authority that both those who work in government and those who are the beneficiaries of that work have a joint responsibility. Public servants must remember that they are just that, and that their duty is to the taxpayers who pay their salaries. But at the same time, private citizens and their organized groups which increasingly speak for them must recognize the limits of what they can reasonably expect from government. If you can hammer this lesson home, you will have accomplished a major purpose. In the final analysis, we must rely on a new kind of interdependence that recognizes the indispensable role of government, but only as it is based on the communitarian values of a civil society. We must understand that in our political system, government cannot and must not mandate or dictate those values. It can only reflect them and use them in advancing the cause of freedom and justice. The base of this strength should not be looked for in some charismatic leader or popular cause. It can only be found in the most durable institutions of our society, in the home and in the family, in the great educational institutions like this one, and in others not so large or prestigious, where the qualities of tolerance and compassion and truth are espoused and defended. And it will be found ultimately in the temples of the human spirit. Because we have been so favored, all of us in this room, we have so much that is required of us. In spite of the mistakes and missed opportunities of the past, in spite of the abuse of our human and natural resources, in spite of the elements that at times have separated us from each other, our nation and its political system remain reservoirs of incredible vitality and strength. It is now our duty to demonstrate, as we never have before, our ability and commitment to work together to overcome the forces of ignorance and prejudice and hatred that would diminish our humanity and destroy our civility. This challenge was spoken to most eloquently by an early public hero of mine. As a young assistant to Senator Stennis, I heard Senator Frank Graham of North Carolina deliver his final address on the floor of the United States Senate after he had been defeated for re-election in a bitter campaign that marked the beginning of the shameful McCarthy era in American politics. Senator Graham spoke these words in 1950, and I would like to close them and commend them to you as meaningful today. Senator Graham said this: "In this America of our struggles and our hopes, the least of these, our brethren, has the freedom to struggle for freedom, where the answer to error is not terror, the respect for the past is not reaction, and the hope of the future is not revolution, where the integrity of simple people is beyond price, and the daily toil of millions is above pomp and power, where the majority is without tyranny and the minority without fear, and all people have hope." I hope that we can let those words be our guide through the perils of this new century. Thank you very much.
time, we'll open the floor for any questions for Governor Winter. Does anyone have any questions? He did such a good job, nobody has any questions. Dr. Wiseman?
Governor Winter, I've heard you and Dr. Collins comment in the past about the good that will come to Mississippi in a two-party state. I guess the two-part question is, can we claim that we finally arrived as a two-party state, and is it a good thing? And number two, how would you assess the condition of the Democratic Party right now?
Are you sure we should have opened this up for questions? Well, there's no question but that the politics of Mississippi is much more healthy with a two-party system in force than it was under the old one-party system. Although under the old one-party system, we function almost as with two parties on the basis of factionalism within the Democratic Party. So, to all intents and purposes, we had two parties within one party, but because we were a one-party state, we were really out of the mainstream of American politics. Everybody knew what the result was going to be, so nobody campaigned in Mississippi. And of course, we were totally haunted by the exclusion from all political activity of African Americans. Now we have a political system that pretty well mirrors the rest of the country. It is not unlike what is going on in most of the country. I think it's wholesome for the state. The one concern I have, I must tell you this, the one concern I have is that we not divide up on the basis of race. Both parties need to be diverse. Both parties need to speak to the needs of the entire society. And we do not need to be labeled as Democrats or Republicans on the basis of what we look like. We have to work at keeping that from happening. And I think we will. I think there's enough good judgment among the people of Mississippi that we're not going to fall off into that abyss, and that we will have an increasingly healthy, strong, two-party political system in Mississippi. Thank you, Ms. Barrett. I didn't put up saying that.
Do you have any more questions? In the back.
One question I'd like to ask. What are the basic differences between the Democrats and the Republican Party? Basic difference we all know both parties leading up to the Constitution. But what are the differences between the parties leading up to
You're going to coach me into making a political speech, you know. At the risk of disclosing that I'm a yellow dog Democrat, let me say that I think the basic difference in the two political parties, and I don't want this to be mistaken as putting the Republican Party down. But most of the major progressive public policies that have developed in this country in the last 2/3 of the 20th century and continue today have been policies that originated out of Democratic Party circus. The Republican Party has been largely a party of the status quo. The Democratic Party has been largely a party that has reached out with new ideas to change and try to make better the social and economic system of this country. I think the record will bear that out. And that's why I'm a Democrat.
Any more questions? Well, on behalf of the Citizens Montgomery Association, the Citizens Institute of Government, and the Mississippi State University Library, I would like to thank all of you for joining us today, and thanks again, Governor Winter. And I would like to invite all of you to a reception immediately following the program here in the Grisham Room. Maybe if you're lucky, Governor Winter will let you have a piece of his birthday cake. Thank y'all.